Genshin Impact has changed. Depending on where you are in your Genshin Impact journey and depending on when you started, you may not have actively noticed this, but if you take a look at the way characters and the way individuals perceive new units or new weapons or new events and new playstyles, now is vastly different compared to how people previously would react or comprehend and compare units ages ago. Now, for reference, I'm an individual who's been playing Genshin Impact back when Venti was released, as in his initial first banner. I'm a day 1 or week 1 player. So looking back at a lot of these things, I can see some gradual changes over time. And I do remember when the resin cap was 120. I do remember, especially if you've been watching my YouTube shorts, that different changes have been made over time that to some players have bettered their overall experience and to others have lessened the impact of things like 5-star artifacts. Regardless of which side of the game you're on, I think one very important thing to analyze and discuss is the general decline in 4 stars. I Win to Lose made a video about 1 month ago regarding every 4-star in Genshin Impact. And I think while that serves as a good basis, I think it's incredibly important now to discuss the differences between how 4 stars operate in the current meta of the game or in the current state of the game versus how they operated when they were originally released. Now, this can include characters who were originally released when the game launched, such as Razor, Chongyun, Bennett, Xingqiu, or even Kaya. This, however, also can include other characters who were added in much later on, for example, Rosaria or Diona or Yanfei. I'm gonna start this problem and separate it off between anything released after or during Inazuma. Once Inazuma hit is when we kind of saw a big difference in how 4 stars operated and how 5 stars were treated. In general, units were evaluated in their singular performance, whether they be as a healer or a DPS or even a support. They were evaluated on their own metrics. An example being, if Diona wasn't sufficient enough as a unit by her own self without the need of a support or without the need of a specific team, she wasn't considered a good unit. This is why if you're looking at earlier units, their kits have held up much longer than newer units because they're good on their own and can work in pretty much any situation. This means they're very versatile, and it means that if you're investing into a unit like Diona or like Yanfei, you aren't inclined to regret that investment because you can use them with a much wider variety of teammates compared to now. This is subsequently also why the units who we had released during these earlier periods of the game were pretty versatile, from Venti to Hu Tao to Ganyu to somebody like Zhongli. Arguably the most limiting 5-star unit who was released during the early stages of Genshin Impact was Xiao. And although yes, there are situations like Child, every unit that was originally released and could be used in a wide variety of team compositions, but ultimately had a playstyle that felt severely limiting to play or very restrictive in how you could play him, he is still nonetheless a unit that can be used in different situations with different team comps. What we've seen post Inazuma's release is characters getting more and more restrictive, or characters being dependent on either an artifact set or a very specific elemental reaction to be more worthwhile. An example unit we've seen now is Kokomi. Now I know it's tried and true that she is a unit who was poorly received on launch, but let me be blunt and clear, Kokomi was a bad unit on launch. People oftentimes say Kokomi was good, it's just that she wasn't really given the chance to shine, and no, that's not objectively true. Kokomi was a healer, and healing at the time and currently today isn't necessarily needed in Genshin Impact because there are so many other sources of healing that can provide more utility to your team, or so many forms of damage mitigation that it's not necessary. A Bennett, a Diona, and a Zhongli can provide much more to your team overall than somebody like Kokomi, and Kokomi's value lies inherently in her freeze capability. She's great with an Ayaka, she's great with a Ganyu, but she got much better with the Ocean Hued Clam set and Dendro's release. This doesn't fix the unit, and a lot of times what we've seen now is, don't get me wrong, I like Kokomi, she's a great unit, and I do like using her, but I would never recommend a new player pick her up because as of right now, there are other valuable sources of healing that you really can use pretty well. But in Genshin Impact, a character is either amazing or they're god-awful. There is no in-between, and Kokomi went from being one of the worst summons you could possibly pick up because she provided no utility to your team to being one of the best summons you could possibly pick up because of a very niche scenario. Now, to clarify, I will say right off the bat, I have my Kokomi. I like her, and she's a lot better than a lot of units that are currently releasing in Genshin Impact, but she is not this god-tier amazing unit people are building her out to be. And the problem is, post-Kokomi, we started being much more accepting of units being bad or poorly received on release and only being better by a specific team composition being added, a specific elemental reaction being added, or a very specific artifact set being made for them. Ocean Hued Clam was basically tailored towards Kokomi, and Chi-Chi happened to just benefit slightly from it. But for every individual currently watching who feels like Sumeru and Inazuma haven't had a decline in the quality of 4 stars and 5 stars, I would like to challenge you to look at the units of 4 stars and find one who has maintained a very good position in the meta and a very good position overall that came out after Inazuma's initial release. This means your options are Faruzan, Heizo, Sayu, Layla, Kale, Candice, Dori, Yunjin, Kuki, Kujosara, Goro, and ultimately that's it. And for the 5-star units, you have a perfectly wide roster. The only thing you can't include is Yelan, because Yelan is a direct copy of Xingqiu. Yelan is a copy of a kit that already is established to work. Ultimately, if you have a Xingqiu, you do not need Yelan. They are just a side grade to one another, and don't get me wrong, they work well together, but it's not a proof of concept. It's not a unit that released with an amazingly unique kit. It's not a unit that was intentionally designed to be perfect, but built from the ground up. No, it's a unit who basically copies a 4-star kit. And we can't really include the Archons like Raiden Shogun and Nahida, because let's be honest here, both of them were guaranteed to be good, especially after the tribute and troubles of Zhongli's release. Ayaka was designed far before Inazuma. Ayaka was designed in the initial concepts of the game alongside Xiao. So if we're talking about units that weren't designed back then, you are kind of limited on options, and many of them haven't held their place. Can anyone explain to me, for instance, why Nilou is so limited in the team that she can be used, in that she has to basically only have Hydro and Dendro? What point did that make? Why is it in a situation in which she buffs those reactions but still works with other team comps? Why is it that Arataki Ito, despite the personality, is so limited in team compositions? Why is it that Miko is so comparable to Fischl? Because don't get me wrong, as much as people will say, yes, Miko works really well in aggravate teams, tell me this, why is it that aggravate is basically required to make a unit feel better than a basic 4-star? And if that 4-star is C6, well, let's be honest here, Fischl overtakes her by a long shot. Because unless you're using Raiden Shogun to supply her with energy, or unless you're using her with aggravate, in which your best teammate will probably be somebody like Nahida or Tignari, she's just kinda eh. Meanwhile, 4-stars, can you find anyone who unironically uses a Candace, a Layla, or a Dori? Or even Kali? My Kali is C6 and I haven't even used her once without just deciding, yeah, she's useful for super exploration when you don't have Tignari. And I'm not saying this because I want every unit to be bad. I'm saying this because I really feel like we should be holding units to a gold standard. The gold standard previously for a good 5-star unit was a Hu Tao, a Gan Yu, and every unit was compared to them. Then that 5-star standard was dropped down to Ayato, which is fair and balanced. And don't get me wrong, Ayato's cool, he's fine. But can anyone explain to me why Sino is the way he is? Xiao is arguably more flexible than Sino. I have both. I have a C1 R1 Xiao, and I would never recommend him to new players because of how limiting he may be to play, but I will always recommend him over Sino. Is there really a situation in which you would utilize Layla over somebody like Diona? Or even Kujosara, she's a great unit, don't get me wrong, she's great for buffing, but why is her buff time limited to only several seconds, to a point where it only really accurately buffs somebody like Raiden Shogun? And I'm not necessarily unhappy with 4-star designs. They're great, they're beautiful characters, they look nice, and their kits and skills are honestly pretty looking. It's the fact that none of these units, newer units at least, hold their weight long term. Everybody excuses this by saying Genshin Impact is a team game, and you know what? You're right, it is a team game. So how about you make a team with that Chi-Chi you have? How about you make a team with the Dori you have? Or how about you make a team with the Jinyen, or your Razor, or your Kaya, or your Aloy if you have her? Why don't you bust out that Barbara that's been sitting there collecting dust, or that Lisa you might have not used, or Farazan? That argument doesn't hold weight long term. The argument itself is fine, but it's used to excuse away issues. Farazan has ER problems? Oh, it's a team-based game. No, those aren't team-based problems. Those are problems that are fixed by constellations. And yes, you could see and say, yeah, well, it's a gacha game, it's meant for constellations, but this wasn't an issue early on. Razor, as a 4-star unit, generated his own energy and refunded it if you swapped him off early while he was in his burst state. And the fact that people say, yeah, you can't compare every 4-star unit to Bennett is idiotic. Because we're not going to make a support or a 4-star unit that can contest with Bennett, then they're never going to get anywhere. There's no point to me bringing out a Kujosara when I could just bring out a Bennett who's arguably going to be better. Yujin is very much better than Bennett in certain scenarios for Yoimiya. But other than that, I would prefer to use Bennett because he heals. He fulfills a utility that Yunjin does not have. So if we cannot get past Bennett, the point is to bring every other unit up to Bennett to where he's an option and not a necessity, not the default. Goro, for instance, was supposed to be Bennett but for Geo, but how about this? Why does Goro only heal at C4? Why does Goro only buff certain units? He buffs defense, which is Ito, which is Albedo, which is Noelle, but Ningguang uses attack, Zhongli uses HP and attack. So they're just kind of left there. It's not a situation of the unit and the player base being discontented and unhappy. It's a situation in which, let's be honest here, if you are a new player right now today, let's say you pull one copy of every unit in the game, but you only have a limited amount of resin to spend. You get a fresh brand new account. It has all these units. You don't know what any of them do. And you go to YouTube and you type in and try to find out who should you build. Do any of you honestly know? Oh yes, both the defaults, Bennett, Zhangling, Xingzhou. But do any of you honestly, and can any of you honestly say or recommend any of the newer units? Yaya is being referred to as is an amazing character, but can you tell me, is she a better healer than any of the other options available? Or is she on par with them? Is she worse than them? Is she only better in a specific niche? Alhaitham, he's cool, right? Great, he's flashy. Is he worthwhile to build in comparison to another unit though? Is he comparable or better than any of the Lyra and Mondstadt art characters, even the Chasm, which is also a Lyra art character? Has any of the Sumeru characters really held their weight? And not Nahida, because Nahida is an Archon. We cannot count Archons in this equation. Let's throw them out. And I know individuals are going to slide into the comment section. Well, I use Sino and he's amazing. Good for you. I use Xiao. I love Xiao, but you also should be able to admit when a character has subpar performance or feels restrictive to play. How many of you who have Ayaka legitimately want to use Ayaka without using freeze? Or how many of you feel instead locked and bound to freeze? There's a difference in having a character who works great with one reaction versus a character who only works with one reaction. I can play my Ganyu in melt and freeze competitions. I can kind of just play her anywhere because she's generally a good unit. But if I were to use an Ayaka, her burst, it works in freeze, and that's it. Ito, he's fine, cool, right? But what teams can you use him in? All I'm seeing is Mono Geo. Flexibility is incredibly important. If Genshin is a team game, why aren't we asking for more team variations with the units that are being released? Why are we suddenly satisfied with a unit that only works with one team comp when previously would have been unhappy with it? Why are we only listing pros for certain characters rather than cons? Tell me this, can any of you tell me why Yaya has to stay on field for her healing? Why is she like Sayu but somehow more restrictive than Sayu? She heals a lot, cool, but are any of you really having a good time, or are really any of you doing more damage because Yaya is running around in her burst state? Can anyone tell me why Nalo is so limited? Can anyone explain to me what the point of Faruzan needing so much energy recharge was? Do any of you know what Candice really does? Have you used her? Do you know when she's good? What about Eula? Can we honestly realize that Superconduct and Physical as a whole has been left in the dust and dead since Eula's release? I don't think we should be fine with mediocre performance with the expectation that it gets better in later patches. We should be fine and asking for okay and average performance that gets better with future compositions that are discovered. I don't want a unit who I pull for now and I know they're mid, but I'm praying and hoping they get better with some other unit. If you pulled for Nilo, you were praying that Nahida worked well with her. You didn't know for sure. And that's not okay. It is not okay to have to get a unit and hope that another unit fixes their inherent issues. And if you don't get the unit that fixes those issues, you're kind of just sitting there crying. How long were Xiao mains waiting for a dedicated Xiao support? And now how many of those same Xiao mains are happy with the fact that that support was locked behind another Anemo DPS? And that same support has energy recharge issues exactly like Xiao, except somehow even worse. I'm not saying I want people to go back to hating everything in the game. What I'm saying is I want people to go back to having standards and actually upholding them and following them. Everybody had a standard for units, and because everybody's like, this is a free game, you know, maybe you're just a meta slave. No, you're not a meta slave. You're not picky. You're not having issues. You are putting time, resources, and investment into these units, and you should expect them to be good, because for you, it could be months of saving. For somebody else, it could be $100. There's an exchange here. That is a sunk cost. If you spend 10 if you spend 10 pulls right now on any banner, let's say you get Yaya, that 10 pulls could have been saved for another future character like Yelan. It could have been a Beidou constellation, could have been a Xingqiu constellation, a Ningguang constellation, a Yelan. That is a sunk cost. And if we're not going to talk about that, then why are we even discussing the value of any 4-star? Hey, don't release a video. How about we just all say, yeah, you know what, build whoever and build everyone. Don't say Yayo is amazing. Don't say anything about Yayo instead. And then we're going to see how long and how far we can all go. It's so difficult now for new players to know who to build, who to roll for. If Alhaitham is good and he's amazing and he's broken, then tell me this, why is he only broken in one team? A character being good with a restricted playstyle isn't the same as a character being good with versatility. You can all say Hu Tao is a good unit, sure, but Hu Tao can work just with one Hydra. Can Nyla? Even Ayaka, she wants freeze, but you want to know what? Let's take out that freeze. Ayaka can do a bunch of damage with her burst. Hu Tao can do a bunch of damage on her own with her pyro infusion. It's not always about damage. Kokomi can heal a lot by herself. Xiangling, Xingqiu, Yelan, Zhongli, Kazuha, Nahida, Bennett. All these units who are considered amazing perform their duties on their own without the need of a support, without the need of another element to allow them to perform to their potential or their basic abilities and mandated jobs. Niloi requires another teammate to do her job. She requires that other element, which is Dendro. So what I'm saying is, there's a general decline in 4-stars, not just in how often people use them, but also in generally how they're critiqued. 4-stars and 5-stars are kind of suffering from the same issue, in which we've accepted mediocrity as opposed to just, you know, wanting a decent unit. And And if you're gonna say, well, you know, if you look at the numbers for Hytham, and he's really good with his specific team, if he's really good with Dendro, if he's really good with Hyperbloom or Spread or Aggravate, cool. It doesn't change the fact that he's good with only this team composition. Because Genshin Impact is a game about teams. It's a game where you should be able to slot in the unit you want to use. If I like Xiao, I want to be able to use Xiao. And you know what? I could use Xiao pretty much anywhere. And if the default answer is endgame, doesn't matter. There is no endgame in Genshin Impact. Great. You know what? I have 36 starter pists. I'm fine with that. But that doesn't mean I expect my unit to just be mid or awful or have issues and accept that. Because at the end of the day, new units are integral to Genshin Impact's success. You don't just play for the story. I like the story, don't get me wrong, I love it. But I also like a new unit who's cool and interesting, has a nice kit, feels fun and fluid to play. So if the new units are just awful because we've all excused it as, there's no endgame, so it doesn't matter, they can be bad, then there's no point to playing. How about you just hop on YouTube and wait for the next story patch update? I don't want units to be bad. I don't want units to be broken, but I want them to at the very least be good. And I'm not saying good in the colloquial sense where they work. I'm saying good as in I can actually use it and not feel like I wasted my resources. Remember back in the day when Amber was considered bad, and you know what, she is still considered bad? How about the fact that we used to actually critique and criticize these 4-star units and say, you know what, this isn't acceptable? I don't know. I could just be like an old veteran player complaining, but I feel like that really diminishes the point, because old veteran players know what it's like to have a good new unit. Old veteran players knew what it was like when Diona was released, and it's like, oh wait, she's good. She does a shield and she heals, she has utility, and her C6 gives you elemental mastery, and her constellation to provide her with co-op utility. Oh man. They know what it's like for a unit to be really good upon release at C0. And for you to look at the constellations to be like, no, wait, they don't fix issues, they actually just add more. Every constellation for Yond Fate improved her initial job, which was to deal damage. They didn't improve an issue that was pre-existing. Every official constellation gave her increased damage. Every official constellation increased her ability to support her team or herself. So when did it change from a unit's own constellations inherently improving their ability to do the job that you really assigned them in their group versus them fixing inherent issues in their kits such as energy recharge? I want my 4-stars to be good. I want them to behave like the base tier 4-stars we have in the game. Units like Diona or Rosaria. I don't want a 4-star or a 5-star who's only good and viable when it's midnight. You can see the stars, it's a full moon. You're sitting at the North Pole and the temperature is exactly 0 degrees Fahrenheit. I want one who's just good. And it seems we've stopped caring about that. So hey, I'll build my Sayu, I'll build my Chongyun, I'll build my Razor, because to me, they're better than the options currently available. I'll wait for a rerun, because reruns are more exciting than the 5-stars currently releasing, because at least I can play a rerun character whenever I want. Remember when Raiden was released and you could play Raiden Eula? Because Raiden indirectly could also assist Eula and it meant for a really fun time? Remember when the fact that Raiden and Beidou didn't work together was considered an actual issue because a 4-star unit didn't work with a 5-star unit that they really should have been working together for? That was a letdown? This is a 20-minute video. It's the longest video on my channel arguably. And I'm just disappointed with the state of it. Because I want individual 4-stars. I like this game. I like the characters. I like the units. I like the lore. I like the element system. But Dendro and Sumeru have arguably restricted the ways characters have performed to such a vast degree that I'm praying for units beyond Sumeru and in regions like Fontaine, Nardland, Snezhnaya, and so on to actually perform good on their own. I don't want it to be a system in which we go from Mondstadt and Liyue, where units had these wide arsenal of abilities that could work with different teams, to slowly being constricted to only working in like one team or 2 teams at most. Even 5-star weapons. When was the last time you got a weapon that was actually good at like Staff of Homa? And don't get me on with Simulacra. Bows don't count. Let's be honest here, every bow is good. What about claymores? What about spears? And I mean this in the nicest way possible, because I can't swear on YouTube. There is no drastic difference enough to warrant getting one spear over the other. If you have a Jade Spear, you don't need to pick up a different spear. I'm gonna be blunt with you. Staff of Homa and Jade Spear for certain units doesn't really matter. It's good for Hu Tao, cool, great, right? Well, really, does it matter that much? There are so many different optimizers that you can honestly just throw in your current stats and see the difference, and it's not that high. And yeah, that may seem like a good thing, but can you tell me why 5-star weapons stopped being so good in the first place? Think about how great it felt to finally pick up like your first Skyward Harp, or how great it felt to pick up your Amos Bow if you're a Ganyu main, or how good it feels to get a Jade weapon or a Gravestone, or how good it can feel to get your C1 Bennett or C6 Official. And tell me, has any new unit beyond the second year of Genshin, or any new unit beyond Inazuma or Sumeru really had that same impact in your account. Well, you got a constellation, you were like, yes. Or you got a weapon and you were like, yes. And I mean a new weapon. Don't tell me you got your first sacrificial weapon or your first fab sword, because those were in the base game. I mean legitimate new things added. Tell me your thoughts down below. I'm not gonna make this too long, or longer than it already is. Subscribe, unsubscribe. You probably aren't even watching at this point, but if you are, hey, there's always next patch.